So we went, well, kids are the ones that are most at risk. Okay, so if kids are the ones that are most at risk, how about we look at it from primary school perspective and go, well, the most likelihood of a child encountering a shaft is going to be where the most shafts are potentially. So why don't we start with how many shafts are within close proximity to these communities? So we did that and got a little bit horrified by the results. And that's where we ended up with our 3 pilots.
Welcome to Tell Us All About It. Today's guest will not be a stranger to anyone working in the mining space in Western Australia, particularly when it comes to closure and relinquishment. Tara Reid has a wealth of experience in this space. She's been the General Manager for the Abandoned Mines Program for DMIRS, now known as the Department of Mines, Petroleum and Exploration, I believe, for the last almost 4 years. Prior to that, has worked in the program for about 6-7 years. She's been a consultant. She's been an industry officer. She's worked in government as well. And she's also worked across a number of different organisations dealing with mine closure, rehabilitation and restoration. It's hard to put a finger on where we first met and when we first met, but let's just work on the basis that it was some time ago. And probably be done with it for the time being. What I can say is that I've always been an admirer of the work that she's done. There's been a lot of it, particularly in the closure and rehabilitation space. What we're here today to talk about is her work with the Dumpy, I'm going to say, Abandoned Mines Program, another acronym for you, which commenced in 2015 following the MRF legislation and the Abandoned Mines Policy. Tara's been at the forefront of this program since 2019 and has been running the program as a general manager for almost 4 years, as I mentioned. It's interesting to note some of the sites that have been completed according to the website. There's been Donnybrook Shaft, the well-publicised Black Diamond project in Collie, Proforce project in Coolgardie, Emerald Reward Mine Shaft in Yalgoo. And there's a number of operations or abandoned mines that are currently being progressed. So welcome to Tara. It's great to have you here. And I was wondering whether you could give us an overview of what the program is all about and what it aims to achieve.
Andrew, thank you very much. You're too kind with your words. Look, it's really wonderful to be here. I appreciate the invitation. And you're giving me the opportunity to talk about one of my favourite topics, which is how we deal with some of the legacies left from over 100 years of mining in Western Australia and the changes in the regulatory environment over that period have left us with different levels of legacy that we have to work on. The really exciting thing for me is this year's our 10th birthday. So the Abandoned Mines program's been in place now for 10 years.
Happy birthday.
Oh, I know it's exciting, is that we're going to celebrate it big time later in the year. But it has been an interesting time to reflect back on how the program began and the journey we've been on to start looking at these legacies. And it took a bit of time really to get the wheels under the program and have sufficient funding come in from the MRF, the Mining Rehabilitation Fund, to really get things going. The exciting thing is they are now, and with my poor home loans really suffering from this, but with the interest rates going up, actually means we're generating an income now, and that has meant we can seriously start looking at some of those legacy sites from mining in WA. We've just got such a rich history of it, and it has really helped this state along economically. So it's fantastic to be able to put something back and start looking at fixing some of these issues.
So what drew you to this line of work? Obviously, you've got a passion for this in terms of your history and your career pathway. It hasn't necessarily all been tied to that, but why the Abandoned Mines program? What aspect of that is interesting to you?
I suppose when you go on a career journey, one of the things that you look for is as long as a learning experience and a challenge. And I had some really interesting roles. I had just finished helping or working in it with a small company looking at mine closure in the Northern Territory. And I was looking and going, what else, what else can I put my hand to? And I heard about an opportunity in the Abandoned Mines program, which was fairly new then. And so I thought, this could be really interesting. It could be challenging. It could be a learning opportunity. And even more, it's part of that being able to make a difference. Mm. And when you're working in industry, you are doing your best to work within the regulations and the economic desires of a company, as well as the environmental conditions that they've been given. And you're working really hard with those two things, which are kind of in a little bit of conflict with each other.
Yeah.
But you can make a difference, but it's hard work, and you don't always get the changes that you might want to see. And I thought, well, this could be an opportunity to look at a legacy issue. Something's been there for a long time. I've spent a lot of time out bush and seen, the results of our mining history, and thought, how could we make a difference with that? And this seemed a really good opportunity. One of the things that's really blown me away just in the last, it's really come to fruit in the last 2-3 years, is I went into this with an environmental lens on what can I do to make our impact, our footprint better. I didn't realise the social benefits that can come out of this as well. And that has been so rewarding, to be able to work with traditional owners and look for opportunities on country and create those opportunities through doing rehabilitation work.
Yeah.
And it's not always rehabilitation the way we see it in industry, because we've got some slightly different focuses. But to be able to bring people on that journey with us and create training opportunities and economic opportunities for people who may have been a little bit more disadvantaged and not had the opportunities at their doorstep, that has been incredibly rewarding. And I didn't realise that was going to be something that I could influence. And it's that with the team behind me, it's just been something so rewarding.
That's amazing. I guess it's one of those things that, you and I obviously play in this space from a mining perspective. Our job is often to get mines approved within the framework of the legislation that we have, and to minimise impacts on the environment, but also looking at how these operations progress through to closure and relinquishment. Why do companies walk away from mine sites? Why are they abandoned? And what are the common risks that you and your program and your team are trying to respond to as part of the work that you're doing?
Well, that's a challenging and loaded question, isn't it? I think there was two parts there. Let me start with the first one. There's really two aspects to the program, and the Mining Rehabilitation Fund Act reflects that in the way it divides up how we are funded. So there is industry pay the annual levy into the fund, and that is called principal. That's the main part of the fund. And then we have the interest earnings on that. The interest earnings are what we can deal with those legacies that were pre the Act coming about. So that 100+ years of mining history, we can use interest against those kind of projects. Your more conventional mine sites that may have entered into economic difficulties, they're the ones that we apply the principle from the fund on. So obviously with the legacy ones, you have a range of things. The Environment Protection Act only came into play in 1986. Yep. So there's a lot of time previous to that where the regulation on what mining companies were required to do wasn't really there. You have to, if you think back a bit further to the State Agreement Acts in the Pilbara, there was nothing there, economically speaking, prior to those companies going out there and developing mines and towns and all the infrastructure around that. So it was a huge bonus to the state to have people establishing those communities in areas where there was nothing much there previous. So when those conditions were put in place, it was about the economic development and opportunities for the state. So you can kind of understand in the context of what was going on as to why those conditions might not be there. And it really didn't happen until after the EPA Act came into place that we started to see that bigger focus on environment. And so those early mine sites, they're the ones we go and play with programs like Safer Shafts for Towns and start looking at those risks to those regional communities. The more conventional mine sites, why do they fail? Well, typically it's economics.
Yeah.
Perhaps the mine's getting towards the end of the life and there hasn't been as much robust planning and companies got into trouble for one reason or another, and they end up dissolving. And so there's nobody left to be held accountable. In the case of Allendale, when that fell over in 2015,
the diamond mine?
The Allendale diamond mine in the West Kimberley, that site was, when it went to receivership in July in 2015, they ended up dissolving all the assets and selling them off. And then in November, December, they used a clause in the Federal Corporations Act that disclaimed the tenements as onerous property. So it basically meant that the liability reverts back to the state.
That's an interesting avenue for lawyers to get involved with, and I'm sure they earn their money being able to find that loophole to divest those properties or those tenements back to the state.
It was the first time it was done in Western Australia. I have been told many times by many lawyers that it's not appropriate to call it a loophole. It actually has a role to play within the business sense of how corporations are broken up when they've failed. Unfortunately, it's not a great outcome for the state. And if you look at Queensland, they have this happen an awful lot more than us. It's not the first time it was the first time it happened in Western Australia. It has happened since.
So how common is an abandoned mine for you? I mean, obviously you're talking about the historic ones, which precede any legislation of note. What about more common ones, or more recent ones? Is it common to see a mine disappear for financial reasons and end up on the program?
Realistically, Allendale is the first and the largest. There are a couple of smaller ones that fit within the principal range, but they're very small scale. A couple of them are exploration sites, large exploration, so it's almost small mine sites. There is another one in Pilbara that has gone over for economic reasons. We have that on our planning schedule. There are some interesting interactions still in play with third parties that mean that we won't jump in and do anything for the time being. We'll wait and see.
In terms of potential acquisition or...
There's issues around when assets are sold during the liquidation process that still have to be resolved.
Yes.
So we're waiting on some of those. And there's potential for third-party interest. We will wait and see what happens with those negotiations with the state and the previous owners.
And so when you jump in, we've got this abandoned mine or this suite of abandoned mines, what's the process of prioritising those sites? Obviously, you want to spend money where you get your biggest bang for your buck, but also I'm assuming there's safety implications, receptor implications, all of those sort of things. How do you go about doing that?
100%. Yeah. No, that's a really good question. Prioritisation is a massive part of what we do and how we go about looking at that. Last year at the AECG International Mine Closure Conference, which was held here in Perth, we actually presented a paper on our revised prioritisation methodology. And we had to, it was interesting because in 2019, a paper was also presented on it. And we realised about 2 years ago, we were having this strategy discussion and one of the team said, look, I think we have a problem. We talk about prioritisation and this approach we're doing, but we're not actually doing it. And I went, what?
Yeah, okay.
And he said, yeah, look, you look at the safer shafts for towns. We're basing that on a different prioritisation than what we say we're doing. I went, oh, yeah, you're 100% right. We need to relook at that and we need to re-examine it. And I was talking with our counterpart in Queensland and they said, oh, we just had an audit finding because we weren't following our prioritisation matrix. So we went, yeah, let's do that. So we spent best part of a year redoing it.
Uh-huh.
And we're really happy with where we've got to. We're still finding it's not 100% right and we're tweaking it, but we've done it through in the GIS with an FME workbench,
yes,
which makes it much more interactive and live rather than using Excel spreadsheets and tables.
So you're weighting specific aspects
Correct.
and then coming up with a risk rating for each site, and that, I guess, will change depending on the economics, the finances, everything else that under the sun. How often do you revisit that? Is it a sort of a regular thing?
So it depends on the program we're running it for. The main reason we use it is for the inventory. So the inventory has around, 190,000 features recorded on it. And those features have been recorded over an 11-year period by the Geological Survey of Western Australia. And they did radius from towns, 10 kilometres from towns, 1 kilometre of major roads. So it's only a fraction of the state.
Yes.
And what we do is how do you work out where you go? You know, we've got all these towns with old shafts around them. We know that it only takes one weather event for a condition to change. Shafts that have been sitting there for well over 100 years, unchanged, can have ground conditions change just through one significant rainfall event.
Absolutely.
So we've had that happen in Kew a couple of times. And so when you look at that, you go, well, where do we start? So, and that's how we realised we weren't doing it right, because the first round said, oh, we need to go here, here and here. And we went, well, this doesn't make sense. We're going out, Kalgoorlie was one of the places. Well, let's go to Kalgoorlie and do this because we've got a community there saying we're not happy. And completely understandable. But we went, well, Kalgoorlie's a really big regional centre. Lots of the shafts that are around the town there have actually been backfilled by the companies working in those areas, and which is just, hands down to them with their social engagement, because they've really done a lot to make those communities safer. But we went, well, why would the kids in Kalgoorlie be any more important than the kids in other towns? So how do we really work out where we should go? And that's where we came up with the theory and went, well, who's at the highest risk of getting hurt in a shaft? We know the inventory started because a child was lost in a shaft in Kew in the late 90s. So
I wasn't aware of that. That's...
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So that's why the inventory was created, because they suddenly realised we had this huge risk out there and nobody could do anything. We didn't know where to go. So that's why the survey had that 11 years they went out and did that work. But then once they did it, there was no money to do anything with it. So the MRF was the first time we were able to actually get dedicated funding to go and start looking at these historic legacies. So we went, well, kids are the ones that are most at risk. Okay, so if kids are the ones that are most at risk, how about we look at it from a primary school perspective and go, well, where are the most likelihood of a child encountering a shaft is going to be where the most shafts are potentially. So why don't we start with how many shafts are within close proximity to these communities? So we did that and got a little bit horrified by the results. And that's where we ended up with our 3 pilots. So we started in Yalgoo because we'd already had reports from the school about concerns with shafts. That was the Emerald Reward that you mentioned earlier. But at the time that was done, there wasn't any money in the fund to do anything significant. So a fence was put in. But we all know, especially if you remember your childhood, fences are only as good as the last time you saw them. And typically, it means there's something to look at.
Fences are meant to be climbed.
Exactly. Mm. So it was always on my mind that was a temporary measure.
Yes.
So as money's come back, we went, okay, Yalgoo needs to go on there because that shaft's still there and it's still scary. So Yalgoo, we've done a lot of work in. Kew, surprisingly enough, came up on that as one of the main issues, and Marble Bar was the third. Marble Bar has the unfortunate distinction of having the most shafts within a kilometre radius of a community. It has, now I'm testing my memory, but it's well over 200.
Wow, okay. So you've identified these particular areas. How do you go about sort of undertaking the rehab or securing these sort of shafts? And I guess since the time you've been involved, what technologies have changed to make your life easier or make this process of rehabilitation a lot easier?
I have a passion for LiDAR.
Okay. Yep.
When we did a pilot first off with Donnybrook. It was one of the first ones we did, and it came about because DBCA were concerned about some shafts adjacent to a major access way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing what they did. They went out there and they started putting LiDAR cameras down these holes. They dropped them down with a backhoe.
Yes.
We've worked with a number of different companies now, and the evolution in the imagery and the portrayal of the shafts just in that short period of time since we did Donnybrook is amazing. It's really incredible, and you don't, unless you see it, it's hard to describe. But being able to portray those images really brings home the risks that you don't see under your feet.
Yeah, true. In terms of, I guess, the challenges that you've had then with the program, I know obviously the interest rates and the way that the financials are set up is interesting and can be a challenge. Are you comfortable with the way the program's set up from that perspective? Are there things that you would like to see change? And I know you're working for government, so I'm happy for you to sort of plead the fifth and not answer. But I'm sure there are things you think could be done better.
Oh, absolutely. I really do think that is the case. We're on a learning journey. Realistically, the wheels really only got going in the last 3 or 4 years, with the conclusion of the Donnybrook project, which was the first real project that you could say, look, we've done a good job. We've actually walked away and left something 100% better than it was. We might not have done as much as, that we could have done, but what we did do was really good. I think we're getting better at what we're doing. One of the things that is challenging is the time. Everything takes time, and some of that is trying to work out what we should be doing.
Yeah.
And trying approaches. So the Safer Shafts for Towns project has really been a learning journey in itself because it's around stakeholder engagement. You need to allow so much time to make sure that we've got all the perspectives in the community on board. We're never going to keep everybody happy, but at least we can allow people to be heard and try and make adjustments as we go. So they're where we're learning. We need more people with stakeholder engagement skills, and we're getting better at identifying the technical skills that we need to bring in and bring them in earlier. So, yeah, it's a learning journey.
Do you think the legislation is set up to minimise the number of abandoned mines you have to deal with?
Well, that's a loaded question. I think there is a lot of room for improvement.
Okay.
And
it's a very diplomatic answer.
I think our regulator is well aware of that.
Yeah.
Making change is challenging in industry.
Yes.
And yeah, I think that's probably the easiest way to put that.
I think the industry probably is better at changing things, and it takes probably a brave operator to sort of move ahead in a space and look at innovation. The legislation tends to be a much slower moving beast, and I think regulators, with all due respect, like to have a box to tick. You've done that. And when there isn't a box that's easy to sort of tick, it becomes harder for those sort of approvals or those sort of approaches to be signed off within, I guess, the framework of the Mining Act or the Environmental Protection Act or whatever else. So
you can almost understand why it's hard to get to relinquishment.
Yes.
When there are so few great examples of our closure outcomes. There are, and don't get me wrong, there are some great examples. Some of them have been very deliberately planned and have been fantastically achieved. Others have accidentally ended up with great outcomes. They are out there, but they're few and far between, and not very many of them have been relinquished.
Yes.
So we also have on the other side of the coin some really, I was going to say good examples, but good's the wrong word. We have examples of where relinquishment has been achieved with outcomes that are less than desirable in today's world. So I completely get why a regulator would struggle with trying to say, yes, we're now finished.
Yeah. You mentioned just before that things have been left in a much better state for certain sites that you've been involved with. What does that final state or that final environment look like from you when you can actually walk away from an abandoned mine and say, we've achieved what we set out to?
When I look at Donnybrook, we walked away from something that was so much better than what I was anticipating. We were going in there with a handful of shafts, looking at it only from a safety perspective in state forest.
Yes.
But it was only safety that we were considering. We were not considering environmental outcomes. The most incredible thing was we had an Indigenous contractor who got the work to do the backfilling, and they took a very unique approach. But they also took so much personal engagement with what they were doing that they dragged material out of the surrounding bush and they left it, and it looked damn near natural.
Were you able to say who that is? Because I'd be interested in knowing who that is.
I don't have their name off the top of my tongue, but their name is in the yearly report for the Donnybrook summary.
It's worth noting for people who are interested in that.
They did a great job, and we weren't expecting that, So to me, they're the kind of outcomes that you can be surprised by and be happy with. Up at Allendale, what we're doing there is taking a site that was really left in a non-desirable circumstance, and the cleanup work that we've done, it's taken a long time. We're working with the seasons in the Kimberley, but from when I first saw that site to today, the difference is dramatic and it's exciting.
I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to get you in, because every time you come and present at a conference or GMG or whatever it is, and you see the photos as these sites have progressed, it's incredible to see what progression there has been and what efforts have been made to get something that is an absolute mess. I saw safety and environmental risk back to something that is getting close to that safe, stable, non-polluting environment that we're sort of aiming to achieve.
Absolutely.
What about the other side of things? Setbacks, failures, things that you just wouldn't have expected or would have done again? Is there anything that you sort of think that, no, that hasn't really worked?
Oh, we've been there. Don't worry. Like I said, we're on a learning journey. With the shafts programs, like I said, we learnt. We did a whole heap of work where we were patting ourselves on the back for the way we approached our stakeholder engagement. We got it so wrong. We really did. We then sat back and we went, we didn't get the outcome we were looking for here. So I sat down with project manager and we talked about it, and we went, look, we've still got some great learnings out of this.
Yeah.
And we've still got some material we can use. It's just not got us where we thought we would be at this point. Let's just stop. So we spent 6 months reconsidering our approach, and we went back to the drawing board and we talked to some more people and reframed the way our approach is, and we had another go. And in doing so, we put the challenge out there to our geotech industry and said, we want you to consider how you would engage with our traditional custodians. We want you're only going to be here for these, different pieces of work on country, but these local people know the ground. They live here. We want you to include them in your proposal. Tell us how you can do that. And at the time, the project team were a little bit anxious over what that might be because it hasn't been done before. But at the end of it, the contract was awarded, the process went through, and I said, how did we go? What was the feedback from both sides? And I was told, the geotech company involved were rapt with the experience, really loved it, and the Indigenous people that they employed had really got a lot out of it. So, taking the time to sit back and reconsider and have another go, you can change things.
There's a lot to be said for, I guess, stopping and admitting you've done something wrong and looking for those different opportunities and those different approaches and trying to reframe an approach that will deliver a different outcome or a better outcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. You've achieved a whole lot over, I guess, since the program has been underway. Where would you see this program going over the next 5 to 10 years? How would you see this evolving? There's a lot of lessons to be learned, legislation changes, approaches to dealing with the finances. What are the things that you would like to see change as we progress?
So when I started, the wheels were spinning a bit. We weren't really managing to get things underway. We were spending less than $1 million a year, and we weren't getting very far. In our next 5-year plan, we just had, it's just gone through budgets and it's been approved. We'll be spending around $40 to $45 million a year over the next 5 years across the board on different programs. What I really want to see change is I'm hoping we can spend less on your typical mine sites and we can put more focus on our legacy areas, because there's so many communities with really difficult circumstances surrounding their homes. So to me, that program needs to grow, and that's what I would really like to see happen over the next 5 to 10 years, is that safer communities space really get more attention and more results out there in the country. I think that's going to be awesome if we can make that happen.
I suppose, the abandoned mines side of things, the truly abandoned ones, are the ones that people have walked away from historically or more recently. A site that is operational, in theory, has some closure already built into it. So they're probably not at the same level of risk as the ones that are the historic ones. Because would that be right, do you think? There's been
an ideal situation.
Okay. So realistically, what do you think?
I think that if a company is in a situation where it might not be able to meet its obligations because it's in financial difficulty, that maybe they're at a higher risk of not having managed those closure obligations as they've developed.
Right, okay.
I think that we are getting better as an industry in the closure space, and that's why I'm hopeful that there's less attention to go on mine site rehabilitation from an abandoned mines perspective, because as an industry, closure is much more important than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. It has a much bigger attention. There are a lot more professionals that can support it. There are a lot more people across the whole multidisciplinary approach that have some understanding of the issues around mine site closure.
Yeah.
So ideally, it's not that side, it's the legacy, those old shafts and things from 100 years ago.
It's interesting you raised the issue of legacy. Your program is going to leave a legacy. It might be for sort of the traditional owners who are associated with those particular pieces of infrastructure, the safer shaft side of things. What do you think the legacy for the abandoned mine programs is or should be, I guess, for the environment, traditional owners, and from a more social perspective?
I believe that we can deliver safer communities in the areas where we've got sensitive environments, that we are able to be in a position to protect them for a longer term. But even more importantly, through the work that we're doing, I believe that we can work with traditional owners and improve social outcomes through opportunities and training under the program that can be realised through the different contractors we engage.
That's excellent. And I guess from one of my last questions, for people who are excited about this, I mean, it's an amazing part of the industry. There's history that you learn about these particular operations. There's the practical aspects. There's the question of the legacy that you're leaving. For young sort of graduates coming into the industry, what advice would you offer about sort of this sort of work and getting into this sort of rehabilitation and closure work? What would your top 3 points be in terms of getting involved?
Be open to opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
The doors that you get that are open to you might not be the ones you expect. Take them.
Yep.
That's the main one. I've been on an interesting journey through my career, and all of the spaces I've ended up in are places that I didn't quite expect when I started out. I wanted to be a vet. I ended up an arid land specialist. So, look, sometimes the most unusual doors open. Never knock back an opportunity.
That's really, really good advice. I note I guess closing, on your LinkedIn page, you said, I won't necessarily do things the way that they've always been done. I think that's a very, very astute approach to dealing with environment mine closure and the Abandoned Mines program. Can we finish on an example of you doing something that in a way that hasn't always been done that way? Can you give me one example of something where you've gone left field and taken an approach that's led to either a good or a bad outcome, and why you went down that path?
I suppose I will use, it's an example I've spoken about recently, but it's really pertinent. And that is when we went out to tender for the first Allendale Earthworks contract, we knew we wanted a trainee program.
Mm-hmm.
And we looked around at what we've achieved in industry and what other trainee programs look like. And typically at the time they were, we will have 3 trainees. We will have them do X, Y, Z, and that will be our trainee program. And we went, it doesn't feel right. There's got to be a better way. And we didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
So we said, all right, when we write this, how about we put the challenge out there and say, you tell us what a trainee program looks like to you. So we did. And the bids we got back ranged from the typical, you're going to have these 3 people or 2 people or 1 person, through to the one that we went with in the end. And it wasn't the only reason we went with them. There's a whole suite of analysis, so don't get me wrong. But by putting the opportunity back out there, you can be surprised by the results you get, because it's not going to be the same. And the journey we've been on, we've had a contract, we've got 3 seasons piece of work. So we're out there for between 5 and 7 months of the year. But in that process, we've been able to give, and I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, I'm so sorry. But like last year we had, I think there were 6 trainees that came out with over 20 certificates of attainment for various machinery, nationally recognised certificates of attainment. So, and that was just one season, some of the people we've had come through there, they might not have had driver's license, they've been disadvantaged, but being present when they get their certificate is so moving. The first time we went there, I remember one of the Indigenous guys getting his certificate, and he had tears in his eyes, and he's going, you don't know what this means to me. This is so important to me. And yeah, I'm just so proud to be involved in something that can have such magnificent outcomes. There's a young man working in the Pilbara at the moment that spent 2 years getting his certificates up at Allendale, and he's now working on a machine, and he's getting kudos up there as being a fantastic little operator. But that's where he started, out at Allendale on an opportunity that the community pitched in and sent him to go and have a go.
That's incredible.
So cool.
And I think that's probably a really good point to finish on, that sort of legacy, not only with the environment, country, but also the social aspects of what you do is and what you can provide through this program is incredible. I can't think of anyone better to run the program. Having seen some of the results in the presentations you've done and given, having spoken to you today, I think it's something that DME's DMPE should be very, very proud of, and you should as well. So thank you so much for coming in today, and really appreciate your time.
Again, you're too kind. Thank you very much, Andrew. I've loved talking to you.
Perfect. Thank you.